Good afternoon, everyone. This is just to let you know that we're live. We'll be starting shortly.
We'll do a roll call in just a minute. If you could text the councillors or chat them to let them know. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and happy Pride. And turns out, it makes a pocket square. So there you go. New skills, COVID pro tips. Okay, I'll call this meeting to order and recognize respectfully that we are having this meeting on Treaty 6 territory, land which has long been special, particularly to the Cree, the Dene, the Saulteaux, the Blackfoot, and Nakota Sioux peoples of this territory, as well as this being one of the great homelands of the Métis Nation, and a gathering place for Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians from many walks of life, trying to build a better city for every single one of us, as hard as that is. So I will call this meeting of the Emergency Advisory Committee to order for June 11th and begin with a roll call, starting with, I think, where did we leave off last time? Councillor Henderson.
I am here.
Welcome. Councillor Knack.
Good afternoon, I'm here.
Welcome. Councillor McKean, let me know that further to the passing of his mother over the weekend, he has other matters to attend to that are pressing, and we continue to feel for him. So he let me know he wouldn't be able to be here for that reason. So next is Councillor Nicol.
Here.
Welcome. Councillor Paquette, I see you there. Say hello.
I'm here.
Welcome. Councillor Walters. Also unable to join us because he is filling in for me at a regional workshop of the Edmonton Metro Board. So absent with leave on council business on my behalf as alternate. Councillor Banga is here in person.
Hello.
Welcome. Councillor Cartmel, I see you there. Say hello, please. Welcome. Councillor Katarina.
I'm here.
Welcome. Councillor Zadek.
Good afternoon.
Hello. Councillor Esslinger.
Present.
And Councillor Hamilton.
Present.
Good afternoon. So that's 11, which is plenty to get started here. Strictly speaking, quorum is 1 at this committee, so we have established quorum and then some. Thank you all for being here. A little bit different context than our previous meetings, since there is not a forthcoming recommendation to implement a state of local emergency, but as we determined last week and then again reaffirmed at council, we want to stay regularly informed here, and with reopen pending tomorrow into the next phase and moving faster even in a number of ways than we had originally anticipated. Agreed with the city manager that it would make a lot of sense for us to get briefed on that. I also understand there is a suggestion that we should add a 4.1 in private update as an event update since we're here, just for information, and that would be in accordance with at least section 24. Any others? Or is that the principal?
That's the principal
For
one. It's the
citation.
one that was used at the last meeting as
So
well.
24 advice from officials for an update in private, which we can deal with towards the end of the meeting. So can I get a motion to adopt the agenda with the addition of 4.1 event update in private, subject to section 24 of FOIP?
I move the adoption of agenda with the addition of item 4.1, event update in private.
Thank you, Councillor Banga. Are there any questions on that? Not seeing any, then I will call the vote on the adoption of the agenda. Please vote electronically if
Mr.
you're
Mayor.
able. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. Maddock.
Yes.
So I think that was Councillor Hamilton, Councillor Zadek, Councillor Nickel, and
Councillor Katarina.
Councillor Katarina. So you
Yes,
should be looking for
Councillor
7
Cartmel.
electronic votes. And Councillor Cartmel, so 6 electronic votes and 5 verbals.
We have them all.
I think I might have voted twice, but that's okay. You have them in spite of me maybe voting twice? Okay, good. I only get 1 vote, which bears repeating from time to time. Okay, so the agenda is, display the vote please, adopted 11-0, so unanimously among those present. I need a motion to deal with the June 4th Emergency Advisory Committee meeting minutes. Councillor Knack, if you'd be so kind.
Yes, I'd be happy to, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move the adoption of the meeting minutes from the June 4th, 2020 Emergency Advisory Committee meeting.
Fantastic. Any questions, concerns, errors, or omissions? Not seeing any, then please vote on the adoption of the minutes.
Yes.
Yes.
We have them all. Thank you.
Display the vote, please. And that's carried unanimously as well. Protocol items? Don't think we have any for today. Selection of items for debate. I'm just going to assume that we need 3.1 and 3.2 and 4.1. So we'll deem them all selected since that's what we're here for. And we'll handle them in order, so no need to make them time specific. Okay, so let's dive right into item 3.1. I know administration has had a lot on their plate managing the accelerated relaunch phase 2, so appreciate that even though we're no longer under a state of local emergency, there's still a tremendous amount of dynamic pressure in this on our city administration, and that is being managed while being down many key employees who have expertise in these areas, sadly because of our financial situation, which continues to be extremely challenging for us. So within those constraints, to manage the accelerated relaunch is quite a piece of work based on what Mr. Laughlin has told me. So, but I'll leave it to him to say more about that. But with our gratitude for you and your team's continued work in a very fast-changing environment. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of committee. This past week we have made a series of decisions, actions, and announcements to advance our relaunch progress. It's clear that excitement among Edmontonians is building, and we're seeing signs of our local economic engine revving up. We temper excitement and enthusiasm of Stage 2 reopening with realism. Our focus is to create the conditions that ensure Edmontonians are safe and the city is in a healthy position to take on the ongoing pandemic challenges. Today's update will highlight the impact of our recent relaunch actions and reports on new decisions that will be implemented in the near future. And we'll share some of the items that are currently being assessed. The province's Stage 2 reopening announcement on Tuesday is evidence that we're making progress as a province. How the city is planning to use this guidance is to achieve cautious progress in an important conversation and will set the tone for our work. In terms of upcoming decisions, the planning work is underway for opening a select number of city recreation facilities, and our target date for that is early July. Edmontonians should be aware that when they go back to these facilities, they will look and feel different. Not all facilities will reopen and some services will be adjusted. Our approach will be announced once a comprehensive feasibility and impact review has been completed. Discussions are underway on City Hall, and we're considering how to introduce public safety requirements, including enhanced security measures, rules for access to elevators, washrooms, and the parkade, and protocols for booking meeting spaces. We're gathering feedback, and that will inform our potential reopening plans. We'll share an update with committee in the coming weeks. On to an update on some of the relaunch implementation. At the Animal Care and Control Centre, most visits are related to pest licensing inquiries and the intake of healthy stray cats, and we'll be resuming appointments on June 15th. There's been good compliance with public health requirements for electric scooters, and the next phase of fleet expansion for the two companies is scheduled for June 15th. For the week of June 1st, transit ridership was at 49% of our 2019 levels. The growth in transit users adds pressure to our ability to ensure that staff and passengers are loaded safely. We continue to look at measures to ensure the ongoing health and safety of our operators and Edmontonians. We're on track for our June 15th fare resumption plans, but we've reached out to the province for guidance on the impact of Stage 2 and measures we would need to take accordingly. Also, starting June 15th, non-surgical face masks will be distributed to Edmontonians at 7 transit centres and LRT stations, and this will continue until our supply of the 500,000 masks from the province is depleted. For the past month, the zoo team has been planning for the successful and safe reopening of the zoo. This includes inspections by Alberta Health Services along the way. Zoo attendance will be capped at 1,500 visitors per day, and time ticketing will be introduced to limit crowding and to spread the capacity over the course of the day. The zoo team is prepared to adjust operations if they observe repeated public health compliance issues. As the Premier recently announced, the province's accelerated Stage 2 reopening begins tomorrow, and it includes pools, recreation facilities, arenas, places of worship, community halls, wellness services, more personal services, and libraries. And some of these were previously identified in Stage 3. Public health requirements and specific guidelines will apply as these services are opened. Stage 2 activities expand the lifestyle options available to Edmontonians, but the pandemic has caused deep fiscal impacts, and the city continues to assess our reopening decisions against our current realities: public health and safety requirements, operational resource, budget constraints, and public compliance. We've shared this with you previously, but our assessments address these questions. Can we relaunch in alignment with provincial orders and public health guidelines? Is this service sustainable? Can we afford to provide the service? And if there is a spike in infection rates, can we backtrack? There is nothing automatic or guaranteed about the resumption of our services in either Stage 1 or Stage 2. This slide outlines new decisions that are aligned with Stage 1 guidelines and that have met our reopening assessment. The funicular and the elevator will resume standard operating starting on June 15th. There's additional prevention measures that will be introduced, including signage and enhanced cleaning of high-touch surfaces. With respect to rental bookings, effective June 15th, the city will permit booking and rentals of city-owned sports fields, ball diamonds, and staffed track and field facilities. A reminder that public health requirements remain in effect, again, which means 2-meter physical distancing at all times between participants, coaches, and spectators. Each participant must use their own or assigned disinfectant equipment, and sharing of equipment or other personal items should not happen. And outdoor groups must adhere to Alberta Health guidelines for gatherings and limit group sizes to 100 people, which includes the participants, coaches, spectators, and the staff that we have at the facility. Due to reduced staffing levels, fewer fields and diamonds may be available for rent, and the frequency of maintenance may be reduced. Rentals in city-operated facilities are linked to our recreation reopening plans, and as I mentioned earlier, that's still underway. Edmonton's 7 municipal cemeteries have remained operational throughout the health crisis, providing internment services for all faith and non-faith groups. Effective June 15th, the sales and administration's offices of Beechmount and South Haven cemeteries will reopen for public and in-person appointments. Prior to the pandemic, the city offered 450 group fitness classes per week inside our recreation facilities. In spring and summer, some of these programs would typically be offered outdoors adjacent to the facility. Starting June 22nd, modified, limited outdoor fitness programs will be offered to Edmontonians. Online registration will be announced shortly. Group fitness classes will be offered at a number of locations across the city. Programming will require participants to observe physical distancing, and we're trying to minimize equipment use. Rent deferral for commercial and residential tenants of the City of Edmonton-owned facilities was provided for April, May, and June for those that were not able to make payment due to economic hardships resulting from the pandemic. The deferral period comes to an end on July 1st. An updated rent payment plan will be introduced for the remainder of 2020. It offers residential tenants a rent payment plan. Small commercial tenants will be offered 3 months rent forgiveness of up to 75%, provided they pay the remaining 25% by the end of 2020 and they provide information that supports that they're having difficulty paying. There are up to 310 commercial and up to 60 residential leases in total, which may all be impacted. This approach is consistent with the intent of the Federal Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. Big Ben events will resume starting mid-August. 5 events are planned through to the fall of 2020. August and September are historically our biggest months for these events. As we discussed last week, and the decision that informed not renewing the state of local emergency, our decision-making model helps us determine steps that we take. Stage 2 comes with new opportunities and considerations. The province has signaled that public mental health considerations and the overall economic conditions are key drivers to moving forward with the relaunch. That said, the province's public health orders and guidelines remain unchanged. They continue to be the rules for all that we do. Maintaining 2-meter physical distancing, practicing frequent hand hygiene, and respecting the group gathering limits are the keys for stopping the spread of the virus and ensuring our healthcare system never becomes overwhelmed. AHS has been clear that infection rates will fluctuate as they did this week in the Edmonton zone. Since June 1st, the number of new cases in the Edmonton zone has increased by nearly 100. The relaxation of provincial public health will result in increased cases and case fluctuations. This is our new normal. We all play a role in preventing a spike and avoiding any steps backwards. The city's reopening actions for stage 1 and 2 are first and foremost focused on preventing exposure among Edmontonians and protecting their safety and well-being. We will continue to watch closely the number of new and active cases. While we join Edmontonians and business owners in their optimism regarding the lifting of more restrictions and the resumption of more business and social activities, the pandemic is still serious, and it's the long game that matters the most. Stage 2 will likely include more sober reminders that the effects of the crisis will take months and possibly years to fully recover from. Our approach is to be thoughtful and intentional about 2020 decisions, and at the same time build on the foundational challenges and opportunities that will emerge nationally, provincially, and locally. Recovery will be built on long-term institutional and behavioral shifts that are left in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. We will be reimagining the actions we need to take and how to allocate resources to recover and achieve our goals. We will be looking at how the post-COVID future will play out for Edmontonians, how that will affect their lives, and in turn, how that will impact the City of Edmonton. Our intention is to have the initial details of a reimagined plan to Council before the summer break. So we too are optimistic about the arrival of Stage 2, and at the same time we are pacing ourselves for this pandemic marathon, and it is a marathon. With Council support, administration is asking Edmontonians to continue to observe physical distancing requirements, to wear masks where that cannot be achieved, respect the limits to the size of gatherings, and commit to proper hand hygiene. It's a pleasure to have Pilar Martinez, the CEO of EPL, on the call with us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Pilar to briefly reference the EPL reopening plan. Pilar?
Thank you, Adam, and good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, councillors, and administration. Nice to see you. So we too were very encouraged by the province's announcement earlier in the week. However, all 21 of our EPL branches remain closed and 80% of our staff remain temporarily laid off. So reopening our branches, just as Adam described regarding the various businesses of the city, is very complex, and the health and safety of our staff and customers, of course, remain our top priority. And while we know customers are eager to access the library again, we want to ensure that we continue to abide, of course, by the public health restrictions in place and make our services available. So we are working hard to do our due diligence to ensure that when we open our doors and reopen our doors, we do so in the safest way possible. So we have already started with phase 1 of our plan, taking the first step towards a phased reopening with we're calling it our library takeout holds pickup service. We had approximately 30,000 items on hold, and that's as of the day that we closed. So we first want to provide those to the customers who placed them before we closed. And then, so currently we are operating out of Lois Hole and White Mud Crossing branches, and we started on Monday. We're going to expand to Clairview and Mill Woods in a week on the 22nd. And we'll expand to more locations in the coming weeks. We're also planning to pilot the reopening of select branches for customers to check out library materials with metered access, so limited hours, limited access, with the public health measures in place, of course, including physical distancing. And we're partnering with social agencies to provide access by invitation to public computers for communities with digital access challenges. And then that'll take us to phase 3, which is a more broad opening of our branches. It's important to note that we have a different business model than a retail store because the items that we manage are in constant circulation. Items get returned and are bought again. So of course we have to facilitate that sharing and ensuring that things remain safe. So that's requiring a 72-hour quarantine of returned material. So that is a summary of our phases. We obviously are very much aligned with the City of Edmonton and are working very closely with the City of Edmonton and Alberta Health. And one other thing, while I have the opportunity, I wanted to mention our Board of Trustees voted unanimously on Tuesday evening to now make EPL fine-free. So we will no longer be charging late fees for library materials. Late fees are barriers to accessing library materials. They most negatively affect socially vulnerable individuals, families in low socioeconomic neighborhoods, low-income, marginalized minority populations. So it's those that have the greatest needs that it becomes the biggest barrier. So we're very pleased. It's not a sustainable source of revenue because of the increase in digital collection usage. And we're just delighted to be able to provide this particularly at this time in what we're experiencing. So thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Pilar, and it is really good to see you, even if it is virtually. Thank you. At last week's Emergency Advisory Committee meeting, and approved at this week's council meeting, we've been asked to bring back recommendations related to lessons learned, recommended policy and bylaw changes, and constructive feedback that we can provide to the province for future pandemic emergency management events. That's the information that is identified under item 3.2, and what we can commit to is that we'll bring these items back for future for discussion at a future EAC meeting. So just wanted to close the loop, Mr. Mayor, on the agenda that 3.2 is really a confirmation that will happen at a future EAC meeting. Thank you, and we're happy to take any questions that you have.
Great, thank you very much. So far, I have Councillor Knack, then Councillor Essinger, then Councillor Zadek, then Councillor Henderson, then Councillor Cartmel, then Councillor Banga. Thank you all for using the chat function to organize those requests. That's very, very helpful to myself and the clerks, and will facilitate a better meeting. So appreciate you all doing that. Please go ahead, Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. So when it comes to masks on ETS, I've read through and from what I heard you say, is it mandatory that somebody's going to be required to wear a mask?
It's not mandatory, but what we have done is reached out to the government of Alberta to get clarity on, from a public health perspective, what they would think we should do. What they did provide is the 500 masks that we are now distributing. And our approach and our messaging has been, if you can't maintain the physical distancing requirements, to wear masks.
Have we thought about making that mandate? I guess first question is, can we? And then if we can, have we thought about that, not just on ETS, but in any city facility where we're going to be reopening, to encourage that? I know it's recommended and not required, but your thoughts?
We are evaluating that, Councillor Knack. I think our first step, as it has been throughout this, is to really engage with the public health officials to get their perspective, to then inform any actions we would take. Our hope is that by the end of this week, we will have a response from the province on our request for clarity around the approach related to transit.
Okay, and sorry, just to clarify, transit and beyond as well. I don't know if we would require it in the zoo as an example, but I ask because I was out over the weekend and I didn't go into any shops, but my spouse did. And as I watched people go in and out of that shop, it was maybe 10% of the people wearing masks. And I'm wondering if we're just not setting a standard that's to really get people behind that notion when you can't be physically distanced.
So we aren't actually assessing mandatory beyond assessing potentially on transit. I think we continue to monitor, and from a compliance perspective, it's been reasonably good. But I think
okay,
I think if so again, the indicators. If one of the indicators we're starting to see a spike and it's related to a particular activity, that may make us look at things differently and potentially look at mandatory masks in certain locations.
And I appreciate that that's being thoughtfully looked at. I just wanted to ask it out loud. So I have some other questions. We've got a lot of messages this week, understandably, about green space maintenance. And while, we do have that city website, which talks about the changes in standards that were generally moved to 21 days instead of 7, and I think that excludes the premier sports fields and premier parks, which we still do 7. I guess I should confirm that. Is that correct, Mr. Sebrick? Am I understanding that maintenance standard?
Correct. For the large part of it is 21 days, and then the premier sports fields are weekly.
And certain spots are nothing, not at all. So I think like some pocket parks aren't being cut at all, from what I understand. Is that correct?
Some are not being attended to, yes.
So we have had some requests, and people may have seen that. I mean, some community members have already maybe taken into their own hands, and I imagine we normally don't recommend that. But I am curious. I have had community members approach me and say, "Listen, we get why you're doing it. Can we help? Like, you know, if we go, are you gonna ticket us for going to help maintain our neighborhood?" And I'm curious if there's been any thought about that. I mean, this is an area where everyone's trying to help each other out, recognizes the challenges. We probably legally, I'm looking, wouldn't normally allow that, but has there been some consideration?
So, Councillor, we haven't started to examine that in detail, but certainly, you know, as part of neighborhoods, community members helping out is greatly appreciated. In terms of the legal parameters around that, I'd ask Ms. Andrejchuk to comment on that, but we definitely appreciate anywhere that residents have helped us out.
Was there a legal perspective on that, or should we just, if the neighbors are interested in helping,
Sorry, can you just
we're going to let them help?
Yeah, ask that part again.
Well, essentially, we have community members who are willing to go out into their pocket parks, into their neighborhood, and do some maintenance, and because they see that as helping to add and really come together. And I want to know if, you know, I don't know if we normally allow that, and if we didn't, would we be fining people if they went out and took the initiative to try to help maintain their neighborhood in a time where we're all cutting every corner that we can to save dollars?
So thank you for the question. And I have seen that other cities have set up similar programs. I would need to look a little bit more into this to see if we would have any liability if individuals did that. I would be surprised if we fined our good citizens for helping out, though, where they felt they could. So if I could just take a few minutes to get back to you on that, I would just want to look into the liability aspect of it.
Absolutely. I'm out of time anyways. I'll come back for a second round, Mr. Mayor.
Just to be clear, we will continue to take the approach that we have taken, which is educate, warn, and then if needing to go further, we'll take that step. If it's something like this, it would be an understanding of the impact and then warning if it's something that we don't want to see happening. But at this point in time, we're not quite sure yet.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Put you down for a second round as well. Councillor Essinger, go ahead.
Thank you. And I'll just follow up along that. If we're going to allow it, I'm hoping we'll communicate that to folks so that people will know that they can do it and they're not going to get in trouble. Because I have heard the same as Andrew. So just on that. My question, though, is around the big bin events. I think you said that in the late August, September, there's going to be 5 big bin events. Are they going to be the more public size? Because many of them have done it in the past as part of community league events, things like that. And many are really eager to have those big events.
So, Councillor Esslinger, we're looking at August, hopefully earlier in the month. Again, we're just trying to coordinate some resources for that. But they would be the larger events, and we would, again, try and move them as soon as we can. We're just trying right now to deal with the seasonal volumes from leaf and yard waste and those activities. But the big Ben events, we are intending to have them in August.
And they'll be throughout the city, right?
Yes, that's right.
I think they might be well used because people have been home cleaning out basements and things like that. I appreciate that. My other question is around local spray parks, because I think I understood that we're not opening the outdoor pools this year. We don't have time to do that. Will we consider opening the local neighborhood spray parks? And along with that, or are we going to consider opening the pools when we open rec centers? A lot of people are wanting to go swimming this summer.
So in the spray parks, it's a function of cost. As it relates to the rec centers, that's part of the work that we're going to be completing over the next little while to understand the approach in terms of opening and digesting the guidelines that have been developed by the province for opening of rec centers and pools. And I don't know if Mr. Smythe has more to add to that.
No, just to confirm, Councillor, that the outdoor pools will not open, but as City Manager says, the indoor pools will scope that into our thinking immediate and are currently to come back to council.
Okay, thank you very much. And my other question is around, you said that our new normal, there will be fluctuations in the number of active cases, but if there's a spike, we may backtrack. Do you have a metric in place to know what that's going to look like? If we get 100, if we get 200?
So we do have metrics that we've established for our own state of local emergency, and we also use those in combination with the Alberta Health Services metrics. And so we have a number of those that we are looking at. No one single indicator would suggest one course of action. We'd look at them holistically and make those decisions based on safety and health and what's appropriate given the numbers and the trending of the outbreak.
All right, thank you very much. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Essinger. Councillor Zadek.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First to Pilar, so I'm glad to see that EPL is opening up again. So I think that's very exciting. Just with regard to not charging late fees, I'm just wondering what incentive is in place to return borrowed material.
So that's a very good question, Councillor Zadek, and we will continue to charge for replacement costs for items that are not returned. So that will continue to be in place and along with notices. But I have to tell you that the research that we did and that has been done, there's about 300 libraries across North America that have already eliminated or some aspect of late fees. And what they found is that there's been no impact on return rates or hold return rates. So we're confident that that this will be a success. And of course, we'll be evaluating it. Very good question.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on, so Pilar, thanks. A lot of my questions on mowing have been asked and answered, but I was just wondering, I know I've mowed my own lawn when I've let it grow too long and it's quite difficult and, with the length of grass and some of these pictures I'm seeing on social media as well as what I'm observing out and about in the neighborhood shows very, very long grass. And I'm just wondering if it requires 2 or 3 passes of a lawnmower. And if that's the case, is this actually a bit of folly in our approach? Whereas it would, under the assumption it would be easier to cut relatively shorter grass with 1 pass of a lawnmower versus what I would only expect would be a lot of clogged up lawnmowers with the wet, high, thick grass.
Councillor, certainly the more you can do regular maintenance, the better it is, whether it's turf or any of our infrastructure. But in this case, it's not the ideal situation. So we are getting to it as best we can with the resources we have. But the aspect of whether it's the cost comparison of making an additional pass versus a reduced frequency, we haven't done those analytics, but certainly when we go from a weekly frequency to every 21 days, there is a definite decrease in the resource requirement. So that's the basis for the decisions that we've made in terms of working within the finances.
Yeah, I just hope you take a holistic approach, and thanks for that. I know it's difficult and you're working with the money provided. I'll just go on the record to say that I'd be happy to try and reallocate additional money to lawn maintenance, but that's not this discussion here. So thank you.
Do you have a source of funds, Councillor?
Yes.
Oh, no,
yes.
No, we're not doing budget here. Carry on, sorry.
Okay. Understood. Garage sales, are they open or closed right now? Are they permitted or not permitted is, I guess, the way to phrase it.
Currently, they're not permitted.
Are there thoughts on the horizon? I get the reasons why they were initially closed, and it was explained that there's multiple touching of items and confined or smaller spaces. But what's our thoughts on garage sales right now?
We're still not allowing them with the social distancing requirements of 2 meters apart. And again, still having people in enclosed spaces touching the same things. Also harder to enforce it on one-off events versus local businesses that are open for longer duration. So our plan is still to not allow garage sales.
Okay, and Mr. Mayor, I don't know how much time I have. I have one more.
55 seconds, carry on.
Okay, perfect. So on the topic of the shisha bars that are being phased out on July 1st, a lot of these places haven't been able to operate during COVID for obvious reasons, but yet we're providing support to local businesses that are impacted. A lot of these establishments are run by new Canadians and they serve new Canadians. And on July 1st, we'll be putting a lot of them out of business, unfortunately. I just want to know if there's been any thought about the shisha file, knowing the council decided to phase them out on July 1st, but of course that was before COVID. So just some thoughts on that, because a lot of these places, their businesses have been impacted like other law-abiding businesses in the city of Edmonton.
So in regards to the shisha bars and hookah bars, you're absolutely correct. The sunset clause that council supported and put into legislation comes into effect on July the 1st. And so we haven't looked at changing that date. That would require a bylaw amendment to come into effect. And so if you're looking for administrative thoughts or feedback on that, we could certainly bring back some information relative to what that looks like if there was an extension of that timeline in the bylaw.
Okay, thanks. That's good enough for now. That's all.
Thank you. Next up is Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the spray park question, because I'm beginning to get questions about that too, and I suspect they will heat up as the temperature heats up. And I'm just wondering, as I sat here, I realized that there may be a kind of equity lens that we need to understand on that, as it gets hotter, for some, particularly people that may not be able to afford other ways of staying cool and kids staying cool, there may be some health implications to that. So how are we going to monitor that? Because I suspect we're going to hear more of that as time goes on. And I'm just wondering, from that equity, with that equity lens, if we're actually disadvantaging people that can't afford other choices.
I think that's a good point, Councillor Henderson. Recalling that pools and spray parks were actually part of stage 3. They've been pulled forward into stage 2. So honestly, we haven't done much evaluation on them, because our original thinking with this is that we would have some time to work through it. But in saying that, we can evaluate that. I think,
and I would say, I get the pools because I think they're probably much more expensive, and I understand they're much more intensive for us to run. I'm wondering if it's just a question of whether we can keep the spray parks in mind as maybe being separate from that, because I'm guessing we're going to get more concern from people once things heat up. So just a heads up.
Yeah, and so with some of these items being pulled forward from stage 3 to stage 2, we will assess based on them being available for opening now.
Great, thank you. Pilar, I'm just curious, not hugely urgent, but it seems to me I'm really curious about Milner. It's one thing to be able to open facilities we've had open before, but I just curious to know where that's at.
It's coming along very well. But we will be opening, it'll likely be later in the phases that we'll open that, hoping to have a little more of a splash than we could right now. Yeah, and it seems to me there's a complexity there that's opening something new is very different from reopening something. I'm also, Adam, I'm curious about what our thinking is with City Hall. I sort of asked to some extent out of self-interest, but I'm just curious.
Well, within stage 2, there was an increase to the number of individuals that can be within an indoor facility. It bumped up to 50. So that has opened it up in terms of the potential. I think one of the assessments that we need to work through is the reason that it was, or one of the contributors to why it was closed in the initial phases, which are some of the security issues that we were experiencing. So we continue to assess, and I think the challenge with a facility like this and the numbers that are permitted is how do you control it within a facility that's this size? It's a bit challenging. So we continue to assess.
Yeah, and I guess the reason I asked was because it seems to me there were two. We shut it in two different stages and for two different reasons. One was what we usually do with City Hall, we shut down, and then we also shut the building. So are we looking at both of those, both of going back to more usual function for City Hall, or just generally making it available again?
Well, the driver for it would be the use of City Hall.
Okay.
So that would be a reason to, from an employee perspective, we've let our employees know that if you are able to work from home, we want you to work from home, and we've carried that message until the end of the summer. So
okay,
that's the approach. So the driver for it would be the ability to actually provide the normal functions within City Hall, which is these meetings.
Yeah, and we're going to have a gap from the middle of July anyway, which gives us a bit of a breather. I have one more question though. I'm interested in, we're seeing an increase in transit. Obviously there are reasons for that. And I'm wondering if we have a good sense of who's coming back onto transit, what's driving that, and what projections that gives us if we're able to track that forward in terms of what we think is going to happen to transit in the next few weeks or months or whatever. If we have an idea of, where how quickly a trajectory will go, if it's going to plateau out at some point, or if we think that there's going to be a continued increase based on the kind of people that are coming back and why they're coming back.
So, Councillor Henderson, we are tracking the ridership on a daily basis and have seen the increases. And largely, the biggest piece of data that we can confirm is that the increases have certainly coincided with the openings in stage 1 and stage 2. The other thing we're trying to do is trying to understand from other jurisdictions what they're seeing as well. But at this point, we know that the schools aren't in session, so the bulk of the ridership increases are largely due to people, returning back to the workplace. We are trying to estimate both short-term increases as well as the longer term, and that's part of the body of work that we've been working on in the Reimagine scenarios. So trying to understand what transit ridership looks like 4 weeks out, 4 months out, and 12 months out and beyond. So that work is underway and continually evolving.
Great, thanks. I'm out of time.
Sorry, I missed. When is
Thank
that
you.
one? When is that one coming back to us? That transit analysis?
Your Worship, we haven't identified a specific time to come back on that, but we can provide an update at the next EAC in terms of what we've seen. Mr. Laughlin did allude to the fact that we are up to about 50% of our normal ridership, so we are seeing that, and certainly we can provide an update at the next EAC.
Great.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
I'm getting a lot of questions in my conversations, particularly with the feds right now about that. So anything even draft you could share with me for the ongoing advocacy would be helpful. But if we can talk about that publicly in a week, that'd be super helpful. Sorry, just piling on there, even though it's not my turn. Apologies. Councillor Cartmel is next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple questions. First of all, about the e-bike subsidy from last week. Can you remind me how much of that subsidy covered per bike and what the total budget was for that subsidy program?
Ask Ms. McCabe to support in that one. The total, I believe, was $600,000, Councillor Cartmel. And I'm just seeing if Ms. McCabe has details.
Sorry for the delay there. Yes, $600,000 was the total for the program. It includes an e-bike program as well as an electric car charging program. And that really is because of market incentives associated with the climate change file. This is what came forward to council during the budget process. And the amount for an e-bike, I believe, is up to $1,500. I would just need to confirm that, depending on the price of the e-bike.
Was there any consideration given to delaying that program in the context of the current COVID budget constraints and concerns?
There was consideration given, and it was delayed back in March. But this was a council-approved program through the budget, and really is about market transition of the climate file and the economic development opportunities, in that it's supporting a number of local businesses with the purchase of e-bikes. We've seen a substantial uptake on the e-bike component. And we do know from an economic development perspective, as we work through COVID, that linking the climate change file and the economic development file will be very important.
Well, I understand that context of it, but just going back to Councillor Henderson's points about equity, we're talking about subsidizing individuals to purchase a vehicle, purchase a bike for up to $1,500. But we're also talking about budget constraints that don't allow us to open spray pads and other thing, or to mow fields that are used by the community at large. So I appreciate maybe this came up at budget, but I don't know that it came up in that specific and detailed context that this is what this program included.
So Councillor Cartmel, we're planning to bring a budget update back on July 6th, sorry. And if there's a desire to discuss decisions that are made related to budget, it can be part of that discussion.
Well, yes, okay. I appreciate that and I understand what you're saying. I will admit to a relatively high level of frustration that, as I alluded to, that there's money for e-bikes, but not for cutting grass or for spray pads. So, and that's the context that is being put to me by my constituents. So I would just flag that we have to elevate some of those kinds of conversations in the context of the trade-offs we're making. A couple of other questions.
Understood, Councillor Cartmel.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. A couple of other questions, sort of one-offs. The Ambleside Eco Station, do we know if that's going to reopen to Eco Station activity anytime soon?
Councillor Cartmel, we have been working with AHS on looking for an alternate site for their testing facility. So our plan is to try and get the Ambleside site operational. I just don't have a specific timeline, but that work is underway to reactivate the Ambleside site.
As a reminder, the annexed areas south of Edmonton that we've just acquired, I don't think have regular waste pickup. So they're traveling an awful long way to get to an eco station to get rid of their waste. So sooner the better for those folks as well. Do we have any more information or timelines on when we might reactivate recreation centers? And I'm thinking more of 3 or 4 months out when we're going to get into minor hockey season, ice allocations, the ice file that needs to be distributed, and any potential that we might open some rec centers but not others, that there might be a hierarchy, timing on any of that conversation.
So working through that right now, Mr. Smythe can add more specifics. Our goal is that we would have a plan formulated, and our target for openings or any openings would be July, and we would continue to develop the plan for consideration of what ice season or hockey season would look like. And Mr. Smythe may be able to add more details.
Yes, sure, Councillor, you're exactly right in terms of that phased notion. It won't be certainly will not be all at once. So that will be part of our plan. And we're certainly working with all of the sport organizations from minor hockey to minor soccer and so on in terms of their seasons and when they believe they can get their league play going. So it's very much the phased approach. It won't be all of them, but we're certainly, that will be part of the plan for sure. And there's also that fiscal overlay, of course, in terms of what can we afford to do.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's my time.
Thank you, Councillor Cartmel. Next up is Councillor Banga.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some of the questions I was going to ask, they have been asked already. A couple more questions. One is, one of the basic question of social distancing, with the termination of provincial health emergency and our state of local emergency, is physical distancing a requirement, or is it mandatory? Sorry, is it mandatory or is it a guideline?
It's remains a public health order, so it's a mandatory.
It's a mandatory.
That is enforceable. Obviously, it's sometimes hard to enforce that, and
No, I get it.
the or the support to that is if you can't, then you're encouraged to wear a mask.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to dandelions again. I mean, a couple of weeks ago we had Yellow City, and now we have Fluff City. Are there any plans to somehow do the boulevard maintenance, especially the high visible areas around town, so that we're telling all the residents to clean up their yards and whatnot, but how can we say that at the same time when we can't keep it up ourselves?
So, Councillor Banga, you raised some good points, and the challenge is, again, with the resources we have, there's limited or reduced mowing frequencies, which is one of the things that helps combat the dandelions. Normally, we wouldn't do any spraying on the boulevards. Any use of any approved herbicide is only on the premier sports fields. So normally there would be no additional controls of dandelions other than the mowing frequency. And right now, with a lower mowing frequency, the challenge is that the dandelions do flourish.
Okay, in one of the previous meetings, I was told that there are 2 cycles to the dandelions. One is somewhere in May, one is in August. But all those seeds in May, they're already planted. So are we going to have a tougher time in August?
Well, I think, Councillor, the second wave will be largely dependent on the conditions at the time. If it's hot and dry, probably not as much as if we get a lot of moisture, then we will likely have a bigger crop of dandelions.
Okay, how is that being communicated to the citizens?
So we are trying to communicate all of our service levels on the website, as well as through regular ongoing communications through social media and other media events. But we're trying to convey, again, all of the different service level changes from the various programs, not just dandelions, but everything that we're working on.
Okay, would it be possible for somebody to send that information to individual councillors' offices so that at least we know exactly we are talking the same thing, all of us?
We can.
So, Councillor,
sorry, Gord, I was going to say we can work with City Ops to ensure that you have that information at your disposal.
Oh, that's great. And I did have, okay, sorry I missed a question about garage sales. They're not allowed at this time, but they will be, they're under consideration?
Currently not under consideration because of as Ms. Anderson said, the difficulty in controlling the 2-meter physical distancing and the multiple touch surfaces and those sorts of things. But again, I think as we continue to get into this reopening, we need to continue to assess and reassess. So, is it shut down completely? No, but at this point in time, we haven't reevaluated that assessment.
Thank you. I got about 26 seconds left. I want to give them to Councillor Katerina.
Thank you. Councillor Katerina, go ahead.
Thank you. So, Mr. Seabrook, question on shared use path roads that have turned into paths. What's the plan for that? And in particular, the one on Ada Boulevard with the pylons up.
So, Councillor, we have been monitoring the locations both for safety and maintenance of the facilities, but also looking at how the utilization is going. I think a lot of these locations are giving us the option to look at how we look at these in longer term. But right now, the intent is that we continue with the locations for this summer season, and then see what could be in a longer term option. So that is kind of the plan, short term and long term.
Okay, so that's staying in place. Is liability one of the reasons why we've actually identified the areas with pylons? Because I tell you what I'm getting. I'm getting a lot of complaints from people on Ada saying that they've always used it as a shared road. They've always walked on it. They've always biked on it. Why do they have to have the pylons there? That's what I'm getting. Is it a liability issue that if we don't identify it is shared use, that there are some challenges with liability if we just say go ahead and use the road without marking it?
So I'll likely ask Ms. Andreychuk to comment specifically on the liability, but there's a couple different aspects to actually delineating the roadway space. There are individuals who are more comfortable walking on the roadway without anything on it, but there are also people who do feel more comfortable when that space is identified for them. So it's a combination of both separating the vehicles from the cars, as well as encouraging people to get out onto that space where they may not normally feel comfortable using that space. But I'll ask Ms. Andreychuk if she has any comment in the legal aspect.
Yeah, maybe just before we get to Ms. Andreychuk, and briefly on it, Pilar, I needed to get your take on Riverview and what the plan is there. I know we haven't opened yet.
No,
we were going to open, but given the circumstance, we haven't opened. So where are we now?
We're ready to open, and we haven't established specific timelines for the opening yet. But you know, as soon as we do, I'll let you know.
Terrific.
But it's looking great.
Terrific. Thank you. Looking forward to that. And Ms. Andreychuk, liability?
So we would need to take reasonable steps to ensure that our citizens are safe if they are walking in that area. So it does make good sense to have the pylons as an extra indicator that the roadway has been blocked off.
Okay, so that's an answer that I needed, or results that I needed to be able to respond to a lot of concerns on. You know, they've always used it without pylons. Why do they need pylons now? So that's great. Thank you very much for that. And last question is a lot of feedback in the past week on e-bikes and the subsidy to it. Councillor Carpmel, I think, described it extremely well, but I've been receiving the same sorts of concerns on equity, why we would do that. And I don't recall that specific item being discussed in full, of whether we agreed or disagreed on that. So Adam, you said you're going to bring back some budget details, and I think having those items separated, not in an omnibus budget, you know, environmental budget, but with all these nuances in it, I think needs to be discussed, because people are a little bit frustrated why we're doing this when they're not getting other services.
So maybe I'll take that one and you can supplement.
Okay. Yeah,
Adam.
Mr. Mayor.
If you would like to do an inquiry or bring a motion asking for a breakout of what was approved in the budget, that would certainly be in order, and an inquiry would be the quickest. That could also potentially be done by memo to give a breakout of what's included in all the different programs that were funded under the climate envelope, inclusive of the one that has had high profile. So that is to say, to not wait till July, whatever, if there's some information that can be circulated before then. Because I think what I heard Adam say was that he'd be bringing us a budget update, which would be the place to have budget discussions about go forward. But if you want information about previously adopted decisions and the programs and authorizations. I think a memo, I see nodding heads from administration that a memo could be generated on that, but an inquiry or a motion could also produce those. But I'm seeing memo, so maybe we can get some information on that before July. Adam?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I think Councillor Cartmel, if you're obviously you're there listening in that, if you'd like to pursue that avenue, I'll give you that opportunity. If not, then I will.
Okay, I think administration's already agreed to produce a memo about that, so, because we can't really do motions of that nature at this committee, but since they've undertaken to do that as a follow-up, the substance of both of your questions and what's been raised and how it came about can certainly get described in a written format.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We can do that, Councillor Katarina.
Okay, well, that would satisfy me with a memo, but Councillor Cartmel, if you'd like to pursue it further with an inquiry or a motion, I'd be happy to support that as well, but I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Okay. I probably have 2 rounds of questions here, and let me double check. Is there anybody else with questions on the first round? Councillor Paquette, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I did put it in the chat just so everyone's clear.
I see it.
So, good questions. Just to follow up on that for administration, do you need an inquiry or a motion to provide that memo?
No, I mean, we can provide that information. Certainly if it's something that's desired for earlier, we can provide it as a memo, but as I said, there certainly is an opportunity to talk about budget when we bring that report.
Right, okay, thank you. Just back to the turf maintenance, I guess. I love that Councillor Banga asked for a schedule, understanding that weather is going to change that schedule, just like with our snow and ice. So we can't actually give concrete answers to residents, but maybe one thing we can give them is the budget implications. And I'm wondering if we just get that detailed as well, so that we can share with residents saying, like, so this is the cost that we incur every year in lawn maintenance on average, and this is what we're saving, because I'm assuming that it far surpasses, for example, the $600,000 for the e-bike rebate. Anyone know?
Mr. Sebrick?
Sorry, could you just repeat the last part of your?
Sure. Well, you know what? I'll put it another way. Do we know what the savings are that we're going to be getting from this reduced service on turf maintenance?
Councillor Paquette, we do have an estimate of the resources that are required as well as the associated costs. So that was all factored into the position that we put forward as part of the supplementary operating budget. So that information is available and we can put that together.
That would be great. That'd be something excellent to share with residents. Now, the other question is, about a year ago, informally, I raised the idea of more of a permaculture approach and maybe even wildflowers and things like that on the areas that we would normally just have grass and mowing. And I guess it's a little bit like a naturalization, but sort of different. And I'm just wondering if we've been pursuing that, because it would mean a lot of cost savings and also beautify those areas.
Councillor, there are some of the areas that the mowing frequency has gone down. So we are looking at consideration of those as part of the naturalized areas, and certainly looking at how it fits with our longer term plan, because we do have a plan for growing the naturalized areas in the city. And this is probably a potential for accelerating some of that plan.
Okay, yeah, because local or indigenous wildflowers is something that seems like I'm getting more and more communications about. So apparently the desire is out there among residents. And the last question that I'm getting is for people who want to sort of follow suit with the city and sort of let their grass grow as well. Are we going to be issuing warnings or fines about that?
When it comes to properties, we certainly understand they may not be maintained on the same frequency as previously. However, we will find the balance between properties that are seen as abandoned or untidy or unsightly and use our regular methods of enforcement to gain compliance before we move to ticketing or MGA orders. And certainly, where we see those, we will be engaging those landowners in conversations to get their voluntary compliance.
Okay, so just to be clear, are we talking about long grass and dandelions looking abandoned or unsightly?
Normally, we look at a number of different things, not just the length of the grass and the types of noxious weeds on the property, but also the condition of the front and the backyard and the property itself. So all of those things are tied together in our assessment of whether it's deemed a nuisance condition or not.
Okay. I'm raising that flag because it might be tricky if their lawn looks exactly like the boulevard across the street, and we go talk to them. So I'm just raising that flag. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the first round? Not seeing any then. Let's start with the pandemic itself, which is still an issue. Notwithstanding us lifting the state of local emergency and the province's stated intent to let the public health emergency lapse, all advice from the WHO to Dr. Tam to Dr. Hinshaw to yourselves is that this is still a very serious issue requiring much higher levels of diligence from the city and from the public and from public places that we have a role in regulating and supporting, from public transit to private businesses that depend on the city for advice on these things. This is still a very serious issue.
Absolutely. And I called it the new normal in my speaking notes, that we can just expect that there will be cases. And if the focus is on restarting the economy and mental health and supporting that, the reality is that there will be an increase in cases, and what we need to do is, to your point, manage it from a control perspective as best we can to minimize the impact on the health system.
And understood, that's the province's approach, is to try to kind of throttle, to dance a little bit with releasing restrictions, understanding that the virus will begin to move more as more people are out and doing more, but still limiting and encouraging social distancing and encouraging the hygiene, all the other measures to keep it from breaking out loose and wild in a way that would overwhelm the healthcare system. That logic still very much applies.
That's correct.
And hand washing, distancing, and face coverings where you can't maintain distancing at minimum continue to be the relevant advice for all Edmontonians.
And gatherings, limiting the gatherings.
Limiting of gatherings, notwithstanding that the numbers are going to change upwards, still putting 1,000 people in the same room and sharing food. We're a long, long way away from grads, very sadly, at this season, balls, fundraisers for anything, but for the causes we want to support. So we're not back to normal. We're far, far from it still.
That's correct. It's a new normal under those restrictions.
And in spite of the maintenance of restrictions, we've seen nearly a tripling of active cases in the Edmonton zone in the last week.
Yeah, increase of 100 from last week.
And that corresponds roughly to the timing of phase 1 reopening, and the uptick in Calgary that is only, in the Calgary zone again, is only a couple of days old, corresponds to you can almost see a 14-day delay in their uptick, which was delayed because of the situation there. So that is to say, the data shows that while it's still under control because it's not rising exponentially, the virus is now being allowed to move through the community at a slightly more enabled rate than a total lockdown, which was meant to contain it to essentially flatline. We're now no longer planking the curve. We're allowing the government of Alberta's strategic approach to this is to allow the virus to begin to move slowly through the population.
Or just maybe not allow it, but that'll be an
deal
outcome.
with the reality that you can't have lockdown and not have that it's inevitable that it will move at some rate.
That's correct.
Yeah, and so our role is to, in alignment with that strategy, work to maintain distancing on public transit, open facilities only when we can be assured that we can align with the guidelines, and try to do so with $170 million still blown in our budget.
That's the challenge that we're faced with,
blown
yes.
in our budget.
Yes.
Okay. So maybe pivoting to that, I really appreciate Councillor Henderson's question. And on the list of things that are shut down, I'm being lobbied very heavily in my own household around spray parks and by many others as well. And what I think might be useful, because it's not appropriate to give direction here, would be building on some of the other questions that we've had, if it would be possible to see of the things that we have had to suspend for financial reasons, and there are many, or scale back because of financial reasons, what those are and what the number is around them, because people are saying, mow my grass, open the things, open the spray parks, open the rec centers tomorrow, and each one of those has a number which may or may not be scary to council and the taxpayers, to say, you know what, we think we should do that. But all of them have cost implications against the backdrop of the uncertainty we heard about just for transit, for example, in terms of foregone revenue carrying on into the future. So could you give us that? Is that what's coming in July?
July is a performance, where we're at as it relates to the financial implications and what that looks like from a projection that we had at SOBA to what our projection looks like to the end of the year. I think what we could do is add that in the July, so that if there is a discussion at council that there's a comfort that something could be advanced from a budget perspective, we could take that action accordingly.
Okay, super. I'm out of time, but I've got a few more questions in that vein. Councillor Knack on the second round, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few. Mr. Sebrick, I saw a post and was also tagged on a post online today, and I'm always sort of taught never to believe everything I read online until I double check. So what I saw is that it was suggested that the cost to set up our shared streets and maintain them would be $781,470. And I'm curious, do you have any numbers around what we've spent to date setting that up? Because that felt really high to me.
So, Councillor Knack, we've had a number of different programs from the shared streets as well as the patios. The cost for the shared streets was just under $44,000 in total for the installation, and all of that was done basically with existing resources and materials. We did purchase some additional materials for the patio expansion project.
Okay, so just so I understand, because you mentioned, so it's under $44,000. Was most of that the setup cost? Like, we don't have a regular weekly maintenance cost, because that was the other thing that was being suggested, and that seemed odd. Like, we're not out there sweeping every week or anything, are we?
No, we do inspect, and if there is anything that's damaged or has been misplaced, we'll correct that, but that would be the limit of the maintenance that would be done on those locations.
Okay, so the main cost would have been, of that 44,000, most would have been the initial setup, printing of signs, laying down the pylons. Any maintenance through to the end of fall would be close to non-existence in terms of cost. It would be replacing a pylon if it was damaged or a sign if it was damaged, right?
Correct.
Okay, good. No, that's helpful. I just saw that number and I thought it was worth asking about, because it seemed really, really high to me. So thank you for that. Then I guess the only other question was just around that legal question related to anyone cutting green space that might not be theirs in the cities. Do we have any new information on that?
Yes, I do. Thank you for giving me the extra few minutes just to double check.
Thank you.
So under our occupational health and safety legislation, the volunteer individuals would still be treated as workers from a liability perspective. And so perhaps one of the next steps that we could do is just look at it more globally, whether this is something that would be feasible from the city's perspective, because it would require us to look at things like training or personal protective equipment if we were to proceed forward in this way. And so,
yeah, and hopefully we don't need to overthink that. I mean, recognizing where we're at, but I appreciate that additional context. Okay, I think those are all my questions, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Banga, you had more questions in the second round? Go ahead.
Just one more question, please. Mr. Sirwick, I know the mowing cycle have gone from 2 to 3 weeks, but my office has received quite a bit of communication in regards to the mowing is done on the boulevards. However, around those shrubs or trees, it's not being maintained. So my question is, frequency of mowing is sure affected by financial decisions. Is the quality of mowing also being affected?
Well, I think what you're speaking to is the overall process that we have. So there, when we do mowing, there's two different cycles to it. Not cycles, two components to the program. There is the actual mowing, and then there is the trimming around the edges, whether that be along a fence line or around a tree. So again, with the reduced resources, we do have limited numbers of staff that can go out and do that work. So it's the same groups that are doing the work. So I guess you could say the quality does change because of the limited resources as well.
Okay, that's a pretty big concern, especially in my area anyway. Thank you.
Other questions on the second round? Let me pick up right there because I'm hearing it and I'm seeing it too. And I understand exactly why the service level is lower because I'm tired of talking about it. As we make the case for the $160+ million budget challenge we're managing. Part of how we're managing our COVID budget impacts is through expenditure avoidance, which includes layoffs of some staff, regrettably 60 more this week, but also we did not hire on the seasonals who we would normally hire on who would be doing a lot of this mowing because we simply could not afford to.
Correct. We used redeployment to fill the basic service level requirements for lawn care or turf care during this pandemic. Just to be clear, the other 60, what they received was a letter of notice. So
okay.
whether they'll be actually laid off is a function of understanding whether rec facilities open or not, or if they get redeployed.
And one of the things that folks might get redeployed to is to mowing crews, for example, rather than hiring on other people. That has happened. So people are out of their normal jobs, which could be an inside job doing a redeployment thanks to union flexibility on that.
Correct. The letter of understanding with the unions has allowed redeployment across the union groups to best to maximize the use of individuals within the organization existing.
All this is unprecedented.
Very much.
For the city of Edmonton. So could also defensively say we're doing our best, but the challenge here really is that is that to maintain mowing every 7 days, which is a normal service level for us, has a cost and a labor implication. And we do have the equipment to do it, I would understand. So we're not even able to utilize our equipment, but it also has an asset management implication in the sense that the turf and the health of the turf, and I'm no expert in this, but we've talked about turf maintenance and we've talked about integrated pest management as it relates to noxious weeds in particular, and also non-noxious weeds, but that are a nuisance. So I wonder whether we have looked at what the catch-up implications of, from an asset point of view, the turf being an asset, will be if we're not mowing frequently enough and the weeds get worse, and how we might monetize the value of that against other issues. Because we've been really good about not impacting other hard assets, but we're still a long way from thinking about natural living systems and ecosystem services in the way that I think we aspire to when it comes to turf maintenance, for example. So is that factored into our thinking? Is there a false economy if the weeds get ahead of us, is what I'm asking.
Ask Mr. Sebrick to help with that.
Your Worship, we have done that work before. I think in some of the previous conversations we've had at council with respect to our turf maintenance and our dandelion programs. So that work is available, and I think we could provide a little bit of insight into what the longer term impacts are and how long we can go without having a higher level of service.
Okay. Yeah, I think our citizens are going to want to know that we're asking those questions at minimum from a stewardship point of view, and also if we do need to find resources from somewhere, or if resources become available to us in the form of aid, where we would prioritize deployment. So if there's a scarce amount of resources that come to us from aid or something else gives, does that help us do spray parks? Does that help us do turf? Does that help us do rec centers? In what order? That sort of thing. You know, what does our relaunch look like? And I recognize that we were not anticipating rec centers to be available to us as an option tomorrow. The province has accelerated not only that phase 2 by a week, but rec centers from phase 3 to phase 2. So, but that's going to have a huge financial implication, because just like transit, they're not going to be full on day one. I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, maybe people will flock to them, in which case you have a crowd management issue, you need to hire extra staff in order to maintain spacing and clean equipment. So either way, it's not going to be normal revenue recovery or normal cost, plus there's restart costs. And if the virus gets away, you got to shut it down again. So I gather, say a little more about all the competing challenges and complexity of the go, no go on rec center relaunch.
So it's, again, goes back to those 4 questions. Can we do it in a way where we adhere to the public health requirements?
First and foremost.
Correct. Can we afford it? That's the next layer. Is it a sustainable decision in terms of reopening? And can we, in quick order, close it if we see a spike? So those are the 4 that lay over top of that. In terms of the complexities, you think of our rec facilities, you know, you have to think about all of the different quadrants that make up a rec facility, and how you can navigate individuals through that, considering the numbers that are limited within a facility. You also have to consider the spacing requirements associated with that, locker rooms, washrooms. Layered on top of that is the enhanced cleaning that would have to happen associated with those rec facilities. So number of factors and overlays go into a decision related to opening any facilities, any services. But it starts with those 4 related to health, affordability, sustainability, and can we close quickly?
That sounds right to me. So thank you, but thank you for walking us through it. I'm out of time. Are there other questions today on 3.1 and 3.2? Are the indicators? Is that included in the original presentation, or do you have a separate?
No, it was, and it was the identification that we are, even though the state of local emergency was not renewed, we are planning regular scheduled meetings, which is part of the motion. We are going to bring back a lessons learned report. And the third one was to write a letter from you to the province. So this was just closing the loop on that.
Super.
That those commitments have been made. So I don't anticipate this item showing up at future EAC meetings, with the exception of the report that will come once we get it crafted.
So for EAC will function as our sort of pandemic response oversight touch point with you on a regular basis. Anything emergent will either bring to council meetings if they're happening, or to EAC meetings called on short notice if necessary. So we can expect to see from that a 3.1 COVID-19 update verbal report be the sole item, the single item, not the sole item, henceforth until something changes.
That's correct.
Or if there's a different issue that needs to be brought before the attention of this committee related to general preparedness.
Yes, that's
Okay.
what I was going to say, because there is an item.
Yes, we do
related
have a
to that.
4.1 next, but what I need now is a motion to receive very thorough with some undertaken follow-ups for additional information coming forward from administration. That's helpful. So receipt of information inclusive of all of those undertakings for information. Someone want to move that? Receive 3.1?
Mr. Mayor, I move the recommendations in 3.1 and 3.2. Or one at a time?
Well, both actually, yeah, we can receive both in one fell swoop. Is there anyone wishing to speak to that? Going once, going twice. Not seeing any, then please vote.
Yes.
Yes.
We have all the votes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Display the vote, please. That's carried unanimously, 11, nothing. I will, in just a moment, take a motion to go in private to deal with 4.1. I'm just going to suggest that rather than breaking from 3 to 3:45, we take a quick comfort break here now once we've processed the motion to go in private, and then that we carry on and finish that way. So I'll just test with the group whether that works by way of adjustment to orders of the day with your consent to break quickly and power through. Nodding heads. Okay. So with that assumption, I'll take the motion to go in private. Hopefully we're still done by 3:30, but.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Banga. Please vote to go in private to hear 4.1.
Yes.
Yes.
We have all the votes, Mr. Mayor.
Display the vote. That's carried unanimously. Okay, 5 minutes maybe, and then we'll reconvene and power through. Thanks, everyone. Alrighty. Then we have reached, are we back online? All good? Yeah. Then we can take a motion to receive 4.1 for information and keep it in private, subject to section 24 of FOIP.
Moved.
Thank you, Councillor Banga. Please vote.
Yes.
We've got the votes we need.
Super. Not sure that's exactly the test. It is for me sometimes, but I assume that means you have 11. Please display the vote. That's carried 11-0. So that concludes the business of EAC for today. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, just a quick observation, and I did try to flag this for agenda review, and I don't know if it's been caught. If we're having an EAC meeting next week, it overlaps with the time that Home Ed is wanting to put aside for us to meet with them. So I'm not, I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, but if there is one scheduled for next week, there's a time conflict there that probably needs to be either, this needs to be adjusted back by half an hour or something needs to be done. So I just wanted to flag that.
There is no EAC meeting next week. This is where we're getting onto the alternating weeks.
But would next week not be considered one of the alternating weeks, so it's opposite the council?
Yeah, there's a bit of an adjustment that we have to make, but there is no EAC meeting next week. It's something we're going to be picking up either before the summer recess or after the summer recess.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great rest of your day, folks. Thanks very much.